Okay, so we have with us David Weinberger and Nick Schultz, and I'm Arnold Kling. What we're going to be talking about is how the internet is perhaps reshaping scientific discourse. That is, it is maybe changing the content of what we mean by knowledge and also our approach for getting knowledge. And we're going to talk with David, who wrote this book, Too Big to Know. Came out, I guess, about a month ago or so. And it's a really interesting book. David, have you downloaded it yet, by the way?
Have I downloaded it?
No. Okay, it seems like a silly question, right? But in fact, so I got it about a month ago on the original Kindle. And then 2 weeks ago, I decided that my original Kindle was out of date and the battery wasn't working so great, so I got a new Kindle. And on my new Kindle, when I brought the book over to that, there was this function called look at popular highlights. So you can highlight a passage in on the Kindle, and the popular highlights gives the passages that have been highlighted by lots of other people. So you might be interested in downloading your book to see what people are highlighting.
Yep, good idea.
And
it's priced a little high on the Kindle for me, but...
in fact, I wanted to read to you maybe a couple of the things that were highlighted. Okay, so this is the very first thing that's highlighted. So what is highlighting an example of in your thinking of this sort of looking at popular highlights? What is that? You would describe that as filtering forward, right?
Not exactly.
No? Okay.
I'd use that for something else. I think it's looking at popular highlights. I mean, I'm not sure what sort of category we're looking for here.
Okay, well, anyway,
filtering forward refers to the difference in how we filter on the web where we link.
Right.
The links don't remove that which they filter out. They only shorten the number of clicks that it takes to get to that. Okay. So I'm not sure I would use this as an example of that.
Okay, all right. Nonetheless, I'll stand corrected on that, but I just want to read you the first thing that comes up under the most popular highlights. This is the most popular thing that's been highlighted in your book. It says, filters no longer filter out, they filter forward, bringing their results to the front. What doesn't make it through a filter is still visible and available in the background. So I think of these, obviously we can disagree. I think of these popular highlights as sort of a filtering forward of the ideas in your book.
Great. I can see why that would be a reasonable interpretation.
Okay.
It's not the paradigmatic example that I would use in order to clarify the concept.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and give us the paradigmatic example then?
Well, any case where somebody is putting links forward and recommending them. So it's somebody, in any of the cases that we do that. So maybe it's recent. I've been looking into somebody who's doing a post about the faster-than-light neutrino stuff. Might recommend some links along the way. If you want to see a really good, popular explanation of it, or want to explore the data behind it, they put in a link, another link. That's filtering forward in that you are, out of all the conceivable links on this topic, and there are a lot, you're picking out the few that make sense to you. Unlike when you're dealing with physical objects, all those other sources are still there and completely findable and may show up on somebody else's post or somebody else's Google Plus chat or whatever. Everything is still there. That's very different from the paper regime that we've had, where most of what gets submitted to a publisher never gets published, and unlike the web, is therefore invisible, unfindable, and basically irrelevant to the culture. Because that stuff gets filtered out, but on the web, things get filtered forward. So that I think is paradigmatic.
Yeah, and that's an example of something that I really want to explore, sort of the difference between sort of the 19th century medium of the book and the 21st century medium of the web and so on. But I guess what the Kindle version of your book is not that simple self-contained book anymore. There's a sort of a social medium aspect to it, at least with these with this popular highlights.
Yeah, and I wish there was much more social media in the Kindle. As when it began, it was on the network, but only in the sense that the only thing they used the network for was to deliver content, which that was good, and to sell you more books. And the connection among readers, which is completely available over a network force, was entirely suppressed. And slowly, but way too slowly for my taste, Amazon is introducing some of that, but not very much and not very aggressively, and they're in a good position to start shaping how we think about what reading is, and they've been extremely timid.
Well, so what we used to think of as a book may end up not being a book in the 21st century.
Well, let me rephrase that, I think, maybe. I'm pretty sure there will still be books in the 21st century. That is, things like what we have now, be electronic, and there'll be some paper ones as well, but clearly digital is going to win in this space overall. But for me, the question is, where does knowledge primarily exist? What do we take as being I'm going to put this crudely, the truest form of knowledge? Knowledge is best expression. And we had thought for a long time in our culture, the truest expression is in an elegantly written book that leads a reader step by step along a path, lots of evidence and good logic, all the way to the end conclusion, which ideally is one that the reader would not have come to on her or his own. It's a surprise. It's a reluctant conclusion. That's the best sort of knowledge, the best sort of book. That's where we have thought. That's where we thought knowledge lived. That's the highest expression of it. That sort of structuring of knowledge, I'm sure, will continue because there's value in it. Plus, there are a bunch of old people who prefer that. But even after we're dead, or I don't mean you guys, but after my cohort is dead, there'll still be people who find value in that form and will produce it. But I don't think that's where we now look for knowledge. So to go back to the neutrino example, faster-than-light neutrino example, which I should say I am borrowing from a talk given by Michael Nielsen about his book, Reinventing Discovery, which is exactly about knowledge and science. If you go back to that example, the faster-than-light neutrino controversy, that didn't occur in a book. That controversy that didn't occur in peer-reviewed journals, high-prestige journals. It occurred on the web in non-peer-reviewed sites. And if you wanted to know about it, if you do want to know about it, you go out on the web, read the original paper, the responses, find the explanations, the discussion, all that stuff. That messy web is where knowledge now lives, and that web is a better reflection of the structure of knowledge than traditional books.
I think you see this in not just the science realm of hard sciences, but also in economics. With all of the most interesting conversations that are taking place about whether it's macro or micro policies have gravitated to the web. Now, obviously, this is huge stock of knowledge and foundation embedded in books and older learning that people draw from, but all of the debates, and even the most substantive ones, are moving to the debates. David, I have a question about the nature of knowledge in your book. You say, the title says a lot. It's too big to know. You're basically saying the world is so complex, so large, that getting a definite handle on it the way that we want to insert a form of the book, maybe it's a lot more tenuous than it was. But you also admit that there's an ancient insight here. I mean, Socrates said, life, all I know is I know nothing, right? So what does that mean for how we should think about the role that experts play in society, right? We usually think, when we want to learn something, we go to an expert, talk to him or her about it because he knows. What does it do for the nature of expert authority? Are there implications?
Yeah, absolutely. So the type of experts the modern sort of experts have a relatively short history in our culture. And that it depends how you date it. You can go back to the middle of the 19th century, but most people take it back to basically the start of the 20th century, when we started to get a professional class of experts to whom we looked for answers to questions within their domain. But it was during this period that we got the idea that expertise works. And not 100%. Everybody knows experts get things wrong. We've always been suspicious of experts. Nevertheless, it was a reasonable thing. And not just to know a great deal, because I hope that will always be the case, but that the social role of experts as final arbiters or close to final arbiters, that was a nice, comforting feeling. And I think we are, to some degree, losing that. So one of the things that's really interesting to me to see...
You think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I do. Because certainly the myth of experts as special people, it's possible to have...
I remember you're saying this in the basement of the Harvard Law Library. You gotta realize what you're saying here.
Well, and I'm trying to be careful, because I've had the privilege of knowing actual, real, deep experts who are, as experts, they are awesome. I mean, refer to a person as a resource, as I'm about to. It's a resource we can't afford to lose, and would be insane to lose. I mean, they're people who just know so much.
I'm going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, we'd never want to lose deep experts. But even as we have them, they're gaining new value in their being networked with other deep experts, shallow experts, and wide experts, and non-experts, and people who can explain experts to non-experts, and all the rest. So an expert in a network is even better than an expert. And furthermore, I've been really interested in the rise in professional consulting among professional expertise organizations, an increasing recognition that they do their clients a service by plugging their clients into a network of experts who may disagree with one another. And in fact, disagreeing with one another is a requirement for having an interesting conversation. So, in fact, they do disagree with one another, rather than hoping to settle matters in one definitive work. The network of disagreement is more valuable than the tome of agreement.
Well, that was one of the more interesting points in the book, that we're now starting to delve into areas where we just expect there to be disagreement. And I want to quote a passage that I highlighted from your book, and that is this. The problem with knowing the role of social media in the recent Mideast revolutions is that the events themselves are the result of a complex cluster of details that defies predictability and complete understanding. The same is true for human events overall, which is why we're still arguing about whether the Civil War was fought over the issue of slavery. And as an economist, we're still arguing over what caused the Great Depression. So it's another example of that, and I think there are many examples of that in economics, which may not seem surprising to you, but if you look at sort of the 50 years following World War II, especially, there was this pretense or hope that economics was going to be a science, in that we were going to have definitive yes or no, true or false for all time answers in economics. And so this need to be able to talk about areas that are going to be not fully resolved and are uncertain is something that I think we can relate to, or that we need to relate to.
Good.
Have you?
Yeah.
But sort of what is it about the internet versus a book that makes these sorts of conversations more likely?
Because books are tiny and they're disconnected, so you have to squeeze out of them much that is interesting and important, and then it becomes difficult to connect them. You can, of course, connect them in another book. That's what most books do. They refer to the other books. But the connection is a dead connection. It's a broken connection. And it's closed to everybody except the people who make it through the publishing houses. So if you have a complex phenomenon and that does not reduce to something simple enough to fit in a book or even a shelf worth of books, then the book medium is not a very good way of representing it or putting it forward, and especially since books are printed and done, they're not a very good way of engaging in process around. They're okay, we've made pretty good progress with books, but if you had a field as complex, and I think I'm using complex in the semi-technical sense, an emergent field, like economics or actually most things that touch human beings, and increasingly, I think we're discovering things that don't touch human beings. Systems, for example, or even cellular systems, whether it's the weather or how a cell works. If we have a system that is very complex, then having a medium that not only is large enough to contain all that we're learning about, but it has lets us link up the pieces and lets us link up differing interpretations, understandings, and put those differing understandings and interpretations into discussion and argument. That is just that maps better to the phenomenon than books do.
David, I'm wondering what you think some of the implications might be for politics and public policy questions, because the standard model for thinking about public policy questions is, well, you analyze a problem and you figure out what the problem is and how to solve it, and then you go about and you institute the solution to that problem. But if our knowledge of if our knowledge is as you say, the world is too big to know, and phenomena, especially as they relate to human beings, are so complex. What does that mean for policymakers, how they should think about their approach to politics? Because as you know, usually it's I have the right answers and I'm going to institute my policies because whether it's my experts told me so or what have you. What's the upshot for too big to know for politics and policy?
Well, so what will actually happen is beyond me.
Well, all right. I know what ought to happen.
I don't know. So it's good that there's more and more information. It's good that we can now address questions we couldn't even ask before, because we need big data and big data clouds to even begin to ask those questions. Facts remain really important, but there's not going to be general agreement simply on facts, nor just as there isn't on the values of policies.
Yeah, there's a line in your book that for every fact there is an equal and opposite fact. Isn't that sort of that sounds frustrating? Is there anything good about that?
It's one thing that I think is good about it is that it takes away our naive belief that is still found in some quarters. Not everybody has ever believed this, but that you win arguments that you're using facts as mallets to beat opponents over the head and beat them into submission. So I have to tread a careful balance here, because I like facts and I want us to continue pursuing them and to bring them forward as evidence in argument. But there has been a particularly, I'm going to say, aggressive and masculine use of facts as if they spoke for themselves, as if all that one needed were facts, and as ways of closing discussions. And that increasingly seems like a unrealistic and inhumane, actually, non-human way of proceeding. Facts, I think we are discovering by seeing how much disagreement there is. Facts themselves are, I think, usefully becoming to be seen as useful constructions. Okay. Not mere constructions. There are things that are right and wrong, but the social role of facts is something that depends on the social. So in that sense, and
I think what this sort of equal and opposite fact is getting at is that people, when they have strong prior beliefs about something, will just sort of, if they're not careful, just assemble and pay attention to all the facts that fit with their prior beliefs and ignore others. And one of the things about the internet that you point out is it makes it harder to ignore the fact that there are other points of view. Like maybe points of view that we thought that we could ignore, we cannot.
Yeah, we had them marginalized, and that is, they didn't get access to the media. The cameras weren't being trained on them, and their books were being rejected, usually for good reason. A lot of crackpots and and more destructive people than that. So one of the benefits of the old system was those people were marginalized. They were excluded. They could find other people to talk with, but they were having a minimal effect on the culture. And frequently that's a really good thing. And now you can't exclude them. So people who have wrong ideas about the relationship with vaccinations and autism have a voice that is ostensibly as large as people who know what they're talking about. And that is obviously a very big issue. That's one of the very bad things. On the other hand, we paid an enormous price for maintaining those old filters, which let in only a tiny amount of information.
Yeah, let me elaborate on that. In that, again, in economics, you couldn't publish in a respectable journal, without expressing yourself in the form of a mathematical model. And then about 10 years ago, economists started catching on to the blogging phenomenon. And it was like you pulled a gag out of our mouths, and we started having conversations that we just hadn't had for 50 years. And it turned out that things that had been sort of settled by this mathematical consensus weren't really settled, and there were just all these sort of ideas ready to burst forth, and sort of discussions that, like I said, that we've never had, that we started to have. So I think that's kind of the plus side of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a huge part of the plus side. And you asked me, which is, for me, the dominant, how to put it, I'm basically optimistic about this change. I mean, there are gigantic issues, but I'm basically optimistic about this. And if you ask anybody in a particular field of expertise, for example, if you're talking with a couple of economists, if you ask them what effect the internet has had on them, they may point some of the negatives, but almost uniformly, I would say uniformly, it has become a crucial tool, and not simply for access to data, although that counts, but for just the reasons that you said. It's opened up a set of conversations that simply weren't having before. It's unsettled some knowledge that needed to be unsettled. It allows people who are not expert. It so fills out the information, the knowledge ecology, that people who don't know about economics now can find people who can explain it to them at any level of detail, any level of knowledge.
What worries you, though? I mean, if you're generally an optimist, what are the things that make you lose sleep over these, over what you're describing?
So the right answer, the two right answers, one is the digital divide, and the other is the echo chamber. I'm less worried about the echo chamber than others are, for reasons we can talk about. It's a real issue. And to see it as an inevitable issue in human.
I wonder about that just because, I mean, you could always have an echo chamber effect, no matter what the technological reality was.
Yeah, so the echo chamber argument says that, while that's true, the internet encourages it, because when people have the ability to choose whatever source they want, then they will choose the sources that are more like that. When you only have 3 channels of TV...
But we don't want to listen to people like that anyway. I mean, I'm more interested in talking to people who actively seek out conflicting viewpoints or reasons.
Well, then you're not like the rest of us. And here we are, 3 white men having a talk about economics and the like. We are pretty much the definition of an echo chamber. We all like the internet. We're all in basic agreement about this stuff.
I guess it would be hard to talk to somebody who doesn't like the internet in this form.
Well, so echo chamber. I mean,
no, but to the extent that the echo chamber is a problem, I see it as a problem of you have as Arnold said, strong priors, you have a fixed set of beliefs, and what you do is look for just positive reinforcement of those beliefs. But you now have a world where if you were, say, not a crackpot, but somebody who had been marginalized before in an earlier era, it's actually easier to find people who have similar, although maybe not exact beliefs, and also able to exchange in dialogue and free exchange of ideas that wasn't possible even 30 years ago.
It's completely possible, and so the echo chamber people will tell you, but that doesn't happen. And then people like Ethan Zuckerman, who is would be a travesty to call him an echo chamber proponent. Nevertheless, I mean, he's a pretty serious thinker and absolutely a lover of the internet, is nevertheless disturbed by the evidence, and he's data-driven. In fact, given this opportunity, Americans basically thought with Americans, we don't give a crap about the rest of the world. We don't engage with the rest of the world. And it's pretty convincing. We like hearing about people who are like us, and we really don't very often reach out to people who are. So, let me just push this a little further, because I know we don't think we're an echo chamber, the three of us. But to anybody outside of this group, they look at three highly educated white men, two of whom are pretty profoundly bald, who have an intellectual framework and a set of values that they share. How much more of an echo chamber could we have to be in order not to be an echo chamber?
No,
we are.
Right. I don't have a problem with describing this conversation as echo chamber, right? I mean, because in some sense, the whole point is, I feel like, David, you and I go back before we even go back. You know, you cite David Halberstam's The Best and the Brightest, which is one of my favorite books. I mean, they're just a lot of commonalities that are probably not shared by very many people. And so, I don't quarrel with that. The question is whether generically echo chamber behavior is so strongly reinforced by the internet that it's becoming much more widespread than it ever was, and that's I think a harder sell.
Right. So I have two questions about it. One is that what is the evidence? What's the data for this? So Ethan has evidence about how much attention we're paying to foreign news, and it's pretty convincing. But that doesn't tell us
how much should we use to pay attention for.
Well, that's
news?
Yes, exactly.
Now
what's the baseline?
Right. I mean, now I talk to people who read the Indian press or the Chinese press or the stuff in the Middle East that they would have never had any access to before.
Yes. So it's not just the data; it's what would constitute data in this case. And the second point is that I agree with you, Arnold. This is an echo chamber. I think it's pretty good, pretty good prototype of what an echo chamber looks like. But on the other hand, and this is the mistake that I think the echo chamber pessimists make, some of them, is to think that it's not to recognize that in order to have a conversation that advances thought, you need people who are 99.9% in agreement, almost always. So conversation is iteration over what turn out to be very small differences, in the same way that supposedly monkey DNA is 90 whatever percent the same as us. In the same way, we have to be speaking the same language, be interested in the same topics, because otherwise I want to talk about movies and sports, you want to talk about economics, we don't have a conversation. We have to have enough values in common that we're able to talk, and agreement on basic facts, and what constitutes norms of conversation. How long am I allowed to talk before you're allowed to interrupt, and all the rest of it. That is a huge amount of agreement, but that's what's required for most conversations where we're trying to make progress in some plan or idea. Now, occasionally, we get put onto a committee or a team or a project where we have to go, and it's a good thing, to usually go through a period of openness where you pull in people from all across the spectrum and you try to have as open a mind as you can. Never perfect, but you do the best you can. That's a good thing to do, but that's one small part of a fairly unusual process. Those are unusual conversations, and that project then advances by narrowing, by becoming an echo chamber where we all agree that what we really need to do is build a hydrogen car, not a solar-based car. So now let's argue about how to do that. I don't have a problem with echo chambers in that regard because they're required for not only conversation, but human understanding works the same way. We absorb things, the unfamiliar into the familiar. Okay. That's just a condition for understanding.
Okay, so go back to your other worry, which I've actually forgotten. What was your other one besides the echo chamber?
The digital divide.
Digital divide.
Yeah, which is, of course, something to be concerned about. It's not, for whatever reason, it's not a primary, for me, it's not the cause that I primarily work on, but I support those who do. And I think everybody recognizes it's inevitable. There will be some level of digital divide always, because the rich will have faster machines, and better access. But getting everybody to the point where we're able to say, just as we can rely on people to have telephones, even though only 95% of Americans actually have telephones, including cell phones, getting us and the world to the point where we can pretty much assume that people are connected, I think is a very important social goal.
All right. Okay. Anything you want to go back to or talk about? Because I think we want to kind of wrap up in the next couple of minutes.
I'm just not sure this is where I want to spend my remaining nickel, but maybe I will, because you asked what I worry about, and I've listed two things that are not primary. They're worries, but not dominating. I'll very quickly mention some that are really scary to me. One is the extent to which we are being polarized. American culture is getting more and more polarized. I think it's not only because of the net. I think there's lots of places to look, but I wonder about the net component of it, if there is. And the other is whether we're going to have an internet, whether we are heading towards economic and governmental policies that will do what Tim Wu in his The Master Switch, really good book, what he describes happens historically to information and communication systems, which is they start off all loosey-goosey and bottom up, and then all the life gets squeezed out of them as they become monopolistic, and basically everything turns into cable TV. And having the internet turn into cable TV, or something, that's a metaphor, although it's also possible. That is something we need to push through this period so that the internet gets set.
Unlike earlier technologies, though, don't you think it's the case that the internet has some built-in antibodies that others didn't? I mean, if you look at, for example, the recent dust-up over the anti-piracy legislation and the extent to which, earlier points of view that would have been in a monopoly age would have been ignored or kept out of discourse, we're able to actually have a profound effect on that. And that's just one example of it. I worry about some of the things you do too, maybe coming at it from a slightly different angle, but I am somewhat optimistic that it has been able to grow and thrive in the manner that it has for as long as it has. But maybe you're seeing things more recently that make you more worried.
No, I think I'm just a more negative person.
Yeah, well, if you can contrast cable TV and the internet, you couldn't have more different architecture in terms of, all the scale economies are at the center, and all the power is at the center in a cable franchise, and there's just the internet, you have the edge having those advantages. So it's
it's plausible to me that the internet for most people becomes a vehicle for delivering content that comes from the center, that is from the access providers. When you have the access providers also being content creators, it's a very dangerous situation, which is exactly what we have. It seems to me that hackers will always be on the edges, and they'll be able to do their thing, and it'll be great. But it's not the transformative social tool. It's like ham radio, I think. It seems plausible to me that we are headed towards a future that locks out most people from practice.
I view this very conversation as a counterexample of that. Right? I'll be able to throw this up on YouTube, and no cable company is going to have any role one way or the other.
Except that they do, because if they want to, if they put up their own YouTube or they want to sell us content, then it is plausible for them to, not necessarily to cut off access, although there is a sort of path that could go down as well to YouTube, but to hobble it.
Okay.
It's just amateur stuff. You don't need the high quality HD that you really need to watch the Hollywood blockbuster owned by the cable company that's selling it to you. So I'm sorry if it sounds paranoid, but the fight against net neutrality was exactly about this. This was exactly what that issue was about. And the anti-SOFA stuff was very encouraging, but it's just, so I'm not saying this is the way it's got to go. I'm saying this is something to be really frightened about and to continue to do, to have the sort of vigilance that at the blackout day demonstrated.
All right. Well, this will be a good example of an issue that won't be settled, because we'll end up.
I want it settled. Come on.
All right. Well, thanks.
The three of us agree on it, right? We're an echo chamber. Let's settle it.
Yeah.
Well, I disagree with you on some of the net neutrality stuff, but I look at the threat as much coming from the government side and imprudent regulation. And I think if you look at the history of regulation, including in network industries, we should be a little more skeptical about the wisdom of regulations coming out of Washington. I understand that there are threats of monopoly concentration of power in the private sector too, but we should be concerned about more than just one aspect of this. So that's where we may not be in an echo chamber.
So nobody wants regulation that isn't needed. So the question is whether I don't want it for its own sake. I want it because, from my point of view, there's evidence of, and almost an inevitability to, the access providers who will also provide content preferring their own content right now.
Mm-hmm. And of course, where we're coming from is that this view that if you really want a monopoly, you need the state behind it. And so if you want to prevent a monopoly, you want to keep the state out of it. So there we have
Well, we already have the state behind it. The access providers have been subsidized, and they are protected by municipal regulations. They are driving monopolies. So yeah, you're right, and that's what we have. So to think that a free market in this case, where there's a great tendency towards natural monopolies, does not require regulation, unless you have some adamant belief that all regulation of the market is negative, seems pretty clear to me. This is exactly the case where we want prudent, careful regulation of the providers, not of the internet. Net neutrality regulates the providers so that we can have an unregulated internet. Did I convince you?
No.
Are you on board?
No.
Okay. I like the echo chamber better. Can we go back to the echo chamber?
All right. Okay. Well, on that note of comedy and agreement, I think we'll close this out. But I tell you, if you wanted to have a book club where we spent sort of an hour a week hashing over the ideas in your book, I'd sign up. I really enjoyed the discussion. I really enjoyed the book. Thanks a lot, David.
Terrific book, David. We're an echo chamber on that front. It's an excellent book.
Well, I'm not so sure about it, but thank you very much.
Thank you.